And very excited to introduce our speaker for the day. Chris started coding life as a full stack developer and moved between all sorts of weird and wonderful disciplines and industries before settling on Android. In addition to coding life, he has been an elected official in the UK, had a key role in legalizing same-sex marriage in the UK through his LobbyALord app, and has addressed the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva on atrocities against LGBT plus people abroad. Diagnosed with depression, anxiety, and ADHD, he taglines himself as very mentally ill, trademark, and writes and speaks about his experience of being diagnosed very late in life and how he deals with the unique challenges ADHD brings to an individual working in tech. And so we're so glad that you're here today, Chris, to talk about Coding and Mental Illness, a Survival Guide. And with that, over to you.
Thank you so much, everyone. It's a real pleasure to sort of speak to you all today from Berlin at 6 p.m, still dark, still winter in Berlin for another 27 months, I think. So let me try and share my screen and hopefully this will work fine. Let's see. Can everybody see okay? All good?
Yep.
And I just want to can I open the chat window separately? Does it allow me to do it? Yes. So I just want to have it in front of me so I can see what people are asking whilst I go along. Do forgive me, although it doesn't seem to be letting me expand, so tech problems. Okay, that'll do, that's fine. So everyone can see, I will start. So my name's Chris. I'm an Android developer in Immo Scout 24 in Berlin. We are Germany's #1 real estate listings app. I suppose, first of all, the mandatory, we are hiring promotion. We're looking for an iOS engineering manager and Android/iOS devs of all levels. I'll be moving on in a month to my first ever EM role, but I'm very, very lucky to be in a position where I'm sad to be leaving Scout behind. The mobile teams are great, and I can thoroughly recommend them if anybody fancies a move to Berlin, the greatest city in the world, in my opinion. If you want to know more, please drop me an email or grab me on Twitter. My details are there. One thing I'd like to add is that when I did this talk in London, I was approached afterwards and reminded that my talk is, as you'd expect, from the perspective of a white man. I may be a queer neurodivergent person, but I do obviously have a certain level of privilege. For example, at my darkest moments, if I turned up to work unshowered or disheveled in sweatpants with my hair a mess, nobody would care. And I know women do not have that luxury in the workplace. I've had some tough times with my mental health, but I'm certain there are people here today who've had it far harder. So what I'd like to do is mold this talk further for when I give it at other events in the future, to include as much as possible the perspective of women in tech. So please, if you have any thoughts or experiences you feel comfortable sharing with me, and don't mind it maybe being incorporated into this sort of talk, please do get in touch. I'll talk about a lot of things this evening, and some of it will be tough. Some of it might lead you to have more questions. If you do, you've got my details here on Twitter and you've got my email. A few disclaimers. I'm not a doctor. Even though the mental health provisions in medicine in many countries, certainly in Germany, are woefully inadequate at best, you must always get your diagnosis and treatment from a qualified medical professional. The second is a content warning. This talk will cover some difficult topics, and frankly, it would be dishonest for it not to. These will not form the entire crux of the talk, but the following will be mentioned. Mental illness in general, I mean, obviously that's the title of the talk. Depression, anxiety, alcoholism, eating disorders, and suicide. So, why mental illness? Why don't you mean mental health? Or don't you mean mental health? And no, not really. Maybe slightly yes, but mostly no. I want to use the term mental illness or disability, and let me explain why. There are lots of people who are neurodivergent or who suffer from things like depression and anxiety. And I understand why they choose to say, I won't call this an illness or a disability, it's part of me. And to those people, I say, of course, this is a rich and complex topic for which even medical research is still scant. So however you choose to characterize this thing that makes you you, I 100% support you. But there was one occasion I encountered someone who does not suffer from mental health issues, and they said, oh, there's no such thing as mental illness, just mental difference. Now, that comment was intended to be helpful. It came from a nice place, but I can quite truthfully and painfully say that my mental health nearly killed me. I'm very lucky to still be here. Even with treatment or prevention, it will always be present. And I want to own it and to beat it or manage it without diminishing the damage it has done to me and continues to do to others. There's another layer to it too. I spent years talking down my mental illness because I was scared, and I didn't want to scare anybody else. So I downgraded it. While it's great that more people would talk about the importance of mental health, they tend to talk about the good and the bad, but never the ugly. And if you talk about mental health, you have a duty to do more than just post inspirational quotes on social media. But more than anything, you need to accept that mental illness cannot be willed better any more than a wounded leg can be. Both require three things: a diagnosis, treatment, and time. Sometimes your leg might never get better, but you find ways to manage your condition and live with it in a way that limits you as little as possible. Same with mental illness. So please call it what you will, but for me, I want to wear the disability/illness moniker on my sleeve until people really do start taking the ugly seriously. So already mentioned, I refer to myself as very mentally ill, trademark. I just want to go through, I think, some of the things that I've suffered from or continue to suffer from. So clinical anxiety. It would start with a thought that something might go wrong, normally something very unlikely to happen, but that my mind would overthink, rapidly so, and go into this depth-first plunge of worst-case scenarios. The anxiety turns from that feeling of rising dread into your chest to a full-on scream. Your stomach graduates from sickly unease to a feeling that defies words, but that I might compare to a set of blades turning inside you, rising up to your chest. And I remember one instance where I was in one of these attacks, and I actually found out right in the middle of that attack that this bad possibility that triggered it was confirmed not to exist. So the trigger, the cause, was not a problem, and my rational brain discovered this. But the blades continued to turn, the crescendo stayed where it was. The outside world, rationality, and simple actual facts had no bearing on the experiences. I had no relief. And we all get anxious. The difference when it comes to mental illness is the intensity and the inability to control it. Depression. And once again, there is a difference between feeling depressed and having depression. Everyone feels depressed at some point in their lives, and this is often where a lot of misunderstanding of the condition comes from. There's a difference between feeling down and feeling down to a state of almost complete paralysis, where things that would normally lift you up have zero effect. Depression and anxiety are dreadful siblings. They're sort of like those sisters in The Shining. They play off each other and they feed each other. Therapy wasn't helpful for me, although it is helpful for others. Medication made a big difference, but didn't fix everything. Alcoholism, something that started as a peer pressure thing at school, ended up being my short-term medication for these dread spirals given to me by depression and anxiety. And as I had those dread spirals daily, I drank every day. And once I started drinking, I couldn't stop. We aren't talking one beer or two, we're talking 2 to 3 bottles of wine a night, every night. I'm an alcoholic, but I'm one of the lucky ones. I gave up alcohol, and as of this day, I checked the number before I came on. I do this every time I do the talk. I must remember to update it. I'm 1,360 days sober. Lots of people call themselves alcoholics, even after they've been sober for years like I have. Sometimes because they want it there as a reminder of the terrible times, but also as a reminder of the progress. Possibly also because the alcohol may not be consumed anymore, but the underlying illness that caused it to be consumed is always present, always ready to pounce again. Personally, I just think of it as like being president of the United States. You get to keep the title until you die. One second. Eating disorder. So when I was hungry, I'd go to the supermarket. I'd see lots of things I wanted to eat, and I went on a rampage of just buying all those things rather than maybe picking one. Then I'd go home and I'd eat the whole lot in one sitting. Sometimes over 5,000 calories of utter crap for one meal. I couldn't stop. I craved the dopamine, and the sugar, whatever else was in the junk I was eating gave me that dopamine, albeit only temporarily. I gained a lot of weight, and I stress this isn't a fat shaming situation. I will always defend people who are plus size and happy that way, but I wasn't happy. My situation was not a product of my enjoyment. It wasn't me living La Dolce Vita, a nice, good life. It was a product of my illness. It was an addiction and an impulsiveness that led me to seek through eating vast amounts of food, that dopamine fix that I wasn't getting otherwise. This one isn't particularly nice, but it's also a reality and one that needs to be considered when it comes to mental illness. Death is a possibility when your mental health deteriorates. And although it remains a little taboo, we don't skirt around it or ignore that topic. It doesn't carry the same stigma. I don't think too much is needed to go into my experience with suicidal episodes, and they were very rare, except to say one important thing. I actually did not want to die. The suicidal moments were the result of a crescendo of anxiety. And when you're in this incredible state of panic, you begin to contemplate many things to make it stop. And this is important because when suicide happens, there's a common response from others, which once again, entirely understandable and well-intended, but it indicates a lack of understanding. And it's normally along the lines of, if you ever feel suicidal, please reach out to me. There's always a way back, or something similar. It makes the assumption that the decision to end one's life is a result of rational thought. And sometimes it is, but I can tell you for me, it wouldn't have been. It would have been a sudden impulse, not because I wanted to end my life, but because at that moment I was not myself. And I was responding to a very irrational mental state. And this is also important because I've lost a friend to suicide. And the last conversation I had with him on Facebook was when he started the same depression medication as me and wanted to chat about it. And I forgot to check up on him. And when I found out about his death, I instinctively opened the Facebook Messenger chat, and rather mockingly, there was that blinking cursor giving me the option to send a message that would never be read. And I kicked myself thinking I could have done something, but the real answer was no, I couldn't have. A lot of loved ones put themselves through unnecessary trauma because they feel this consequence could have been stopped if only they'd acted. And that is yet another reason why it's so important for everyone to learn more about mental illness and to accept that it can have the same fatality, the same uncontrollability as physical illness. Sometimes people don't get better. But for me, condition-wise, that wasn't all of them. It turned out that all of these conditions were a symptom of something else. They had a mother condition. Graphic design is my passion. A friend of mine got in touch with me and told me that his depression and anxiety was a misdiagnosis, and he'd instead been diagnosed with ADHD. And I'll be entirely honest, I thought to myself, ADHD, isn't that the thing the disruptive kids at school had? And why has he got it? He was top of the class at university. He was very successful in life, and he was someone who I very much looked up to. Anyway, I did a bit of Googling, which is always definitely a good idea when it comes to medical stuff. And I came across a reliable source that listed the symptoms of ADHD. I read through that list one by one, and by the time I reached the end of that list, I'm like, uh-oh, damn. It read like a biography of me. Everything in that list was one big tick. ADHD is an intensely misunderstood condition. For a start, I never even considered I might have it. Nobody else considered I'd have it because at school I was the top student. Correlating mental illness with academic failure is one of the reasons this condition is so misunderstood. As well as being the root of many of my problems, the symptoms present themselves in a way that could not be worse to a software developer's working environment. In fact, I'd say that for various reasons, coding is both the best and the worst industry for someone with ADHD to be in. Anyway, there are 3 reasons I wanted to turn this experience into a talk. First one, whenever I do talk about my diagnosis, there is always at least one person who without fail gets in touch with me to say they've had the same eureka moment with the symptom list that I did. ADHD ubiquity is a far bigger problem than anybody could have possibly imagined. And that means there are lots of people out there with my problem who, like me, didn't know about it. Whilst I'm glad that this talk has helped some people, the scale of this problem is really unsettling. Secondly, if there are people out there who have ADHD and who don't know it or know what it really is, like I did, then the people they interact with in life won't know either. And in software development, I can't understate the impact this had on my professional progress, in addition to my own personal well-being. So this talk is not just for those who are or might be neurologically different. It's also for those of you who want to help, who want to create an environment in the workplace that is compassionate and empathetic. And finally, thirdly, in January, when I got my diagnosis, I was given some pills. And about an hour after I took my first one, I couldn't quite believe it. There are no words that do it justice because it has been quite literally life-changing. But if you ask me to pick one, I'd say clarity. Suddenly, the background noise in my mind quietened, the panic mess in my head flying around at light speed, wanting me to concentrate on so many things at once that I normally ended up getting nothing done at all, suddenly became focused. Sometime later, when I had a moment on my own, I just broke down and cried, because that was the moment, at 36 years old, I realized that so many of the obstacles I'd experienced up until then were not just a character flaw or disinterest or apathy or laziness or personal weakness. It was a condition. I wasn't average. I just played my life on hard mode. And I never knew I was playing it on hard mode because we don't get to play life on any other mode than the one we experience. We can't know something is wrong when we don't ever live life in the heads of people that don't have something wrong. We have no frame of reference, no comparison. And this was the first moment in my life where I experienced what it was like to function as an ordinary human being. I suddenly get to play life on slightly less hard modes, never easy mode and not quite normal mode, but a lot closer to normal mode than I was before. And I don't do this talk because I want your sympathy. I don't deserve it or want it because I have my solution. So many others out there do not. And I feel a duty to talk about my condition and my fix, because for the many people out there who suffer, especially those who don't even know it, I want you to have that fix too. So I thought this was going to be about coding. Yes, okay, I'm getting there. But without a doubt, the biggest benefit people have got from this talk is that eureka moment. And for that to happen, you need to know what ADHD is and what the symptoms are, both for yourselves and for your colleagues. ADHD stands for Attention Deficit and Hyperactivity Disorder. Sometimes the hyperactivity is optional, but that's because one acronym can't possibly cover the very unique configuration of a mental condition that someone might have. But it's not just badly named, it's wrongly named. It's named after the symptoms as everybody else sees them. So as such, I'm going to list the symptoms, but as they're seen by other people from the outside, especially from the context of working as a software developer. And another disclaimer, not everybody with ADHD has the same symptoms. Some people have fewer, some have more, some have milder, some have more severe. So here are just some of the very common ones. It's quite a list. Do try and take it in. I mean, this used to be quite a common scorecard for me. As I sort of averaged my way through every single job I ever worked at, they would be mixed with good points and normally with he can clearly code, so why are these problems here? And when you read this list here from a third-party perspective out of context, be honest, would you want to work with that guy? I wouldn't, and I was that guy. So as problems disappeared as a result of my treatment, I'm going to add here on the right-hand side those symptoms from my perspective, the perspective of a person with ADHD with the benefit of hindsight. So easily distracted, not very attentive. What is perceived as a lack of attention is actually too much attention. So what does that mean? A classic symptom of ADHD is rabbit holing. You start with one subject, and before the person talking to you has finished what they're saying, your mind has darted around every single crevice of a topic. And you might then blurt out something that grabs your interest, but because it's 3 steps away from the subject you were originally talking about, to someone else, it will appear you were ignoring them entirely. And sometimes, because your mind is occupied on these multiple things and their dialogue is not going quick enough for your brain's patience, you're actually not taking in what they're saying. Another common example is getting your phone out to do something, then something distracts you on your phone, maybe a notification, and then you forget what it was you opened your phone for in the first place. Now, as for a lot of ADHD symptoms, these examples tend to happen to everybody at some point. The difference is in the frequency and the intensity. I've had situations where I've got my phone out 4 times in a row, and each time forgotten. Then in a final one, just ignore the notifications, Chris. Just do it. So too long didn't read. It's not that the lights aren't on; it's that all the lights are on. So this is a symptom where the hyperactivity comes in. And in childhood ADHD, it often manifests itself as children running around, making a lot of noise, being unruly, but to an intense level, duration, and regularity. In adulthood, a lot of people with ADHD report difficulty sitting still for long periods, needing to switch between tasks, getting impatient easily, etc. And this manifests itself for me quite often when waiting for Gradle to build. So seriously, get those enterprise build scans working and buy M1 MacBooks for all your employees. The psychiatrist won't prescribe that, but I do. Excuse me. So this is a big one. There's lots of arrows there. Excuse me. Of all the symptoms of ADHD, this is the one that caused me the most problems, and the one that so many others report as the biggest problem too. The others surrounding it just contrived to make the situation worse, but this is the daddy. Imagine a simple task like taking out the bin. You know you need to do that task, but as you comprehend doing it, your brain gives you the highest and strongest signal of rejection. This small task becomes as difficult in your mind as climbing a mountain, and your entire body responds emotionally as such, even though it's just taking out the bins. In general, when it comes to task management for people with ADHD, one of the most commonly reported symptoms is when given a large undefined task or a significant quantity of small tasks, our minds become so overwhelmed by the magnitude of the work required that instead of getting maybe a few tasks done, we end up getting none of them done. Some people refer to that as ADHD paralysis. Another example is knowing that you have an appointment or a meeting later that day, and for no good reason whatsoever, you can't do anything before that meeting. To an outsider, it looks like, procrastination, and that you don't care about your job. But inside your mind, you're panicking that you're not doing things that need to be done, while simultaneously too stuck in this state of paralysis to do anything about that. Paralysis creates guilt, and guilt erodes your self-worth and your confidence in your abilities. Another common symptom is being unable to prioritize. We hyperfixate on something that our mind tells us is interesting and super important, and we deviate from the task at hand. Sometimes hyperfixations are a superpower. I actually sort of hate it when people sort of talk about ADHD as a superpower, because it really isn't. But let's stick with it for this example. Whilst concentration can be a problem on the things that you should be doing, people with ADHD report the ability to pick up a new skill with ease. So when you can manage to hyperfixate on things that are helpful to your career, sort of direct your hyperfixation onto the stuff that you need to do, you can very much do some incredible things. And of all the things I just mentioned, they all take a mental toll. If you spend the entire day comprehending simple tasks, and for every single one, imagine every task that you think you have to do during the day. For each one, your brain responds with the highest level of emotional rejection. You end the day as a jittery mess of dread and anxiety. So in the evenings, I was emotionally exhausted, but so on edge from that daily experience that I wouldn't be able to relax. And that's when I'd normally open a bottle of wine, and we all know how that went. The overthinking, the panic, the dread would continue when I tried to sleep. I'd end up eventually managing it around 3 or 4 a.m. and then be unable to get up in the morning. I'd be late for work, and it would feed into this perception that really I just didn't care that much. So lots of people with ADHD report random short-term memory loss. For example, immediately forgetting the name of someone you were just introduced to. I have something else. I find myself also randomly forgetting things I've known for years. At one point, I forgot my PIN number for no good reason. And occasionally I find myself introducing a friend to someone that maybe I've known since childhood, and I would just have a blank. I would suddenly forget their name. And I can't explain it. I can't explain why, but lots of people with ADHD report this. Now, that's all embarrassing in a social situation, but in the workplace, when you're asked to explain a concept, for example, the flow of a project you've been working on, and although you have been working on it for weeks, your brain questions you as you explain it. It gaslights you. And you end up looking incompetent as you tie yourself up in this pointless charade. Oh yeah, and one final but very key one, impulsivity, a very common symptom that those with ADHD make impulsive decisions on things like buying stuff they don't need, for example, or making quite significant life decisions on a whim. Or as I found out, walking into a supermarket to buy one specific thing and leaving with a lot of alcohol and a lot of junk food, and then eating and drinking it all alone in one sitting. I'm trying to, whilst people are putting questions in and comments, and I'm trying to read them as I go along, I will try and remember them and put them in at points, but I just noticed Stephanie's comment about always forgetting important things when I get put on the spot. And I can give you a great example. Since I moved to Germany, I've been learning German, didn't speak a word when I arrived. I'm at a reasonable level now. I'm at enough level for citizenship, but if I'm put on the spot, I'll have this moment where someone will say something to me and I will blank and say, you know, the various things you can get away with saying a couple of times to get them to repeat it. And then my brain, after the event is over, will then say, here you go, Chris, that's what they said. And you go, thanks, brain. That's very common to me too. It's being put on the spot or being in this situation where you're asked to explain something and you somehow just randomly forget it. So by the way, my pills eliminated a number of these symptoms, and for the rest, they gave me the space to work out how to manage them. In fact, it was my pills that made me realize some of the symptoms were symptoms in the first place, because after taking them, I suddenly realized they weren't there anymore. In the past 10 months, my work and productivity has improved astronomically. I got much fitter and healthier in terms of my physical well-being. I stopped throwing money down the drain because my impulsiveness had been tempered. It probably was a reason for my alcoholism too, but I don't want to tempt fate by testing that. I'm attentive. I don't get sleepy after an hour of learning. That's a common symptom. And I noticed this from friends who got diagnosed as well. If you ever went to a conference, a coding conference, and you've got this 2-hour session, and just for some reason, as the day goes on, you start feeling so tired, as if you've been tranquilized. You start feeling so tired and you're trying your best not to fall asleep. And that went away. And I thought that was just me being inattentive, lazy. But no, it was related to my ADHD. In the evenings after work, the dread and anxiety has been replaced with calm relaxation, mostly. My insomnia is gone and I wake up most mornings at 6 to 7 a.m. and I go for an 8-kilometer walk around Tempelhoferfeld. I mentioned this at the beginning. It's a disused airport in Berlin. If you're ever here and you fancy a nice walk, it's great. So this person here, who used to wake up on Saturdays at 2 p.m. Is a morning person now. I've just, in September, I stood in an election in a country I moved to only 4 years ago, not speaking a word of the language when I arrived. And I've learned more German since taking the meds than in the 3 years previous. And things still get bad. I don't want to present this as a fix. I want to present it as a solution that, you know, it's all gone away now. Things are difficult. There's no magic solution, but my medication gave me the agency now to pick myself up and to be able to tackle those things. And most importantly, since then, I've not had one single suicidal episode. I like this quote. A friend of mine sent it to me after he was reading my thread on Twitter, which I have pinned to the top. So if you're interested in symptoms, I sort of occasionally just add it to that thread. Either my ADHD friends need to stop being so relatable or I need to go and see a doctor. Some of you in here may be diagnosed already. Some you may have suspected for a while, and some of you may not have realized, and you may have watched this talk and you might have gone, damn, just like I did once. So how do you survive having ADHD as a coder? Obviously, I managed it for years before I was diagnosed somehow. You know, even though it was impossible, it was difficult and it was dreadful. But with the treatment, I manage it now too. It's not gone. So there are 3 essential tips that I can recommend. So this one is more than anything, I would say this is the #1 thing. If you have ADHD, you suspect you have ADHD, you have problems managing tasks, this is just, I'll give a link to this person at the end, but there's someone called ADHD Big Brother on Spotify that talked about how those of us with ADHD crave quick rewards. And we love those apps where we tap, you know, like the cookie tapper and all that sort of stuff. A cookie tapper, I sound like such a boomer. I can't remember what it's called. You know, we love those sorts of apps where you're sort of tapping and you get immediate response, immediate points. You know, I realized, funny enough, when I got before I realized it was ADHD, I'd been doing a lot of this before, but that's to get a to-do list app. Add all your daily tasks in there, and I mean all your tasks, and try to make them no longer than 10 to 15 minutes. If they are longer than 10 to 15 minutes, break them down further because they're too big. And it's absolutely great Jira and grooming practice, I promise. At my worst mental health state, I know that no matter what happened, if I reached 30 tasks, I would feel better. And everything for me is in that list. Even my daily shower, because at my worst, it wasn't even certain that would happen. But when you get a point for it and it's a game, you create that incentive. It's a hack for your brain, but lots of people report that it works for them. Another thing we're bad at is looking back on our day and thinking we achieved nothing. And doing it like this reminds you that you did. And guess what? It can become a hyperfixation. These apps have APIs. You can do what I did and create progress graphs and work out your weaknesses, improve your processes, and then see those graphs change. Get that immediate reward. It becomes your tap app. And your mobile developers, you can create an app that sort of does all these things. If your to-do list app isn't perfect, you can add things in. I'm currently developing my own app where I'm in the morning after I've taken my medication, I have what I call the ADHD meds high, roughly an hour later. And that's when I'm walking around the field. And I'll have some really creative ideas. And previously I just whacked them into a Google Doc, but I've got an app now where I'm adding them in, and they then get put into my inbox to be processed for my to-do list app later, so they don't get lost. You know, so turn this weakness into a strength, you know, without using the superpower thing again, you know, turn your kryptonite into your superpower, or try to. Sorry, let me just go back. So the examples here, Todoist and Amazing Marvin. Amazing Marvin is very much designed for people with ADHD. I use Todoist because it's simple, it's quick. Use whatever gets you into it first. Don't worry about configurations, just start using it. And this is really key for, you know, with ADHD. So many of us, this is another common symptom. I put off for ages developing certain apps because I'm like, well, I need to have the most powerful laptop. I can't do this until I have this. You know, I can't write until I have the nicest pen. Just do it. Just put your stuff in there. And if it doesn't work, you can change it later. Just go ahead. That's all you need to do. That's what I recommend anyway. #2, come on, get diagnosed and get treatment. Be persistent in doing so. And I know, let me scroll back up to mentioned earlier. Someone mentioned earlier, and I forgive me for taking a bit of time to do that, but I know someone mentioned it, is how difficult it is to get a diagnosis in some countries and in some places. I'm struggling to find it, so I'm so sorry. Yes, from Navati. So the cost of the ADHD test is so prohibitive. I was very, very lucky. I did this, what's on the screen now. I finally found a psychiatrist in Berlin, and it's like trying to get blood out of a stone. It's impossible. And so I've heard some real horror stories from some people that tried getting ADHD meds. One person who went to his first psychiatrist was then told that the psychiatrist didn't believe in ADHD. He then paid for private, and then when he got his private diagnosis, which understandably was the worst, he had the worst case of ADHD, worst, that was what the test was. And then he went to a public psychiatrist to then get the medications given, because he didn't want to pay each time to get his medication. And they then said, no, you've got to wait for a month. So we got an appointment. So fine, you waited a month. And then after that month, they said, yes, sure, but we offer it as a holistic package. You need to sign up for yoga and self-help classes before we give you the medicine. And this rigmarole that people expect you to do, these loops, these hoops that you have to jump through as someone who is neurodivergent in order to get the treatment, it's so bizarre. These are the one things that we can't do. We can't be persistent. We struggle with managing tasks and managing time. So we have these doctors that say to us, we will give you the magic pills if you turn up to this event, that event, that event, and do all these things that aren't clinically proven to help you at all. And it's really frustrating. So I absolutely relate to what you're saying. So if what I can recommend, Navati, is if you are back in, I don't know where you are in the world, but try and find people in your city, in your town, online who have had their experience, and they may be able to point you in the same direction. I've managed to do that for a few people with mine. But yeah, so sorry, I just had to deviate and answer that question. So there are many different types of treatment for ADHD. The pills work for me, they don't work for others, or the side effects are too much, so people find ways around it. For some, therapy helps, whereas it makes little difference for me. Whatever it is that you know, might help you, that you feel might help you within the grounds of good medical science, be persistent that this is what you want to try. And that's rubbish. As I said, we all suffer, you know, persistence is very much in low supply when you suffer from ADHD or from various other mental morbidities. I do want to tackle something that's a bit controversial, even though it shouldn't be, and I hope that women who code mobile won't stop inviting me after this. Mental illness is invisible. It can't be objectively tested for in the same way that many physical illnesses can, and because of this, it's exploitable. The first claim goes something like this. Don't take pills, use a natural remedy. Don't put chemicals into your body. So let's deal with this claim. This happens a lot in Berlin, where alternative medicine is advertised in every pharmacy. Firstly, everything is a chemical, including your magical homeopathic water potion. And as for natural remedies, there is nothing more natural than the components of the periodic table that make up all known matter on this planet. Any discouragement of approved medicine should be done on the grounds of good science. If you go to a doctor for your mental health, and instead of offering you a referral to a specialist, therapy, or actual medicine, they give you an alternative remedy, run a mile, because it's utter nonsense. The British Medical Association refers to homeopathy as witchcraft, which I think is a little unfair to witchcraft, because at least witches are cool. In countries like the UK, where alternative medicine is not so ubiquitous anymore, the challenge is more subtle. Here, there we talk about mindfulness or a holistic solution. Now, these words as defined in the dictionary would be fine if they didn't normally mean don't take any medicine for this problem. So be aware of the woo. The fact that the medical profession can't explain everything, or that the mental health provision is inadequate, doesn't mean that these snake oil salesmen have the answer, because they absolutely do not. Number three, you know, I only put this in because it helped me. Whenever I get this rejection sensitivity that says this task is, you don't want to do this task, no matter how easy the task is. I tell myself, don't do it because you have to, do it because you can. I can't remember where I heard it, but it really did help. You know, it's not about willing yourself out of your mental disorder, because you can't do that. It's about changing the scenery. By switching from the imminence of a deadline to the simplicity of a task, I found that it reduced the pressure enormously. It doesn't work for everyone. There's no magic bullet, but it makes a real difference for me. So maybe try that. So how to be a good ally or colleague? I mean, there are lots of suggestions here. Ask your workplace what their mental health policy is, from recruitment all the way to management. Do they just send out cutesy memes on Mental Health Day, or do they train their managers? Do they make their job descriptions accessible? What do they have in place for the ugly side of mental illness? And be as angry about those blockages for those with mental illness as you would be if you saw colleagues in wheelchairs have to deal with the fact there are no lifts to their 4th floor office. Give colleagues the benefit of a doubt. And I'd like to address a big elephant in the room. And it's this: how do you know if they have a mental illness or if they're just faking? And the answer is to assume they're not. And it's better to morally and ethically approach every problem first with compassion. It's better for one faker to get away with it than for one person with genuine mental health problems to be harmed even further, because that further harm really will bite. So give them the benefits of the doubt. Those of us with ADHD want support, and we do not want to be absolved of accountability. So instead of saying, I'm extremely concerned about your performance, simply approach it from a sympathetic and kind way, changing from that saying to, we want to do everything we can to help you do your best. It's a simple tone change and it achieves much better things. And I'm not saying get rid of your disciplinary process. If employees have genuine struggles, they will accept help and compassion willingly. And if they don't, then there's only so much you can do. I am a realist when it comes to this. Things aren't always black and white. Create a team environment where everyone feels comfortable to ask stupid questions. You know, this is my mantra, I think, when I become an engineering manager. Do this anyway. Don't just do it for people with mental illness, mental disorder, disability. Every software problem ends up being something simple that we may have missed. We know this. The number of times we get a second pair of eyes to look at our code because we spent hours on it, and then they suddenly notice what's wrong in a few seconds. We're not stupid. That's just how coding works. You know it. And the same goes for processes, ideas, analysis. Think of how many times you've asked a question and then realized, oh, damn, I know the answer to that. Or a colleague answers it because it seems so simple. At my team in Scout, we have this approach with my wonderful Android team. I love them very, very dearly. And you'd be surprised when we, how many people actually didn't know things but keep quiet about it. Because when we sort of say, hey, you know what, I'm really weak on this subject, I would love to learn more about it. And another person says it, and then another person says it. And then we fix it together. And if we hadn't done that, people would have just been quiet and we wouldn't have helped each other fix a problem. We'd have carried on with the same level of knowledge as before. And that would have probably been at some point reflected in the code in some release. So, you know, you'd be surprised how many people keep quiet about this sort of thing because of that wonderful imposter syndrome. A team that looks after each other and feels looked after is a team that produces. I mean, you know, there's the answer. Give options for your technical tests. Some people crumble on in-person coding challenges. And this gets a lot of consternation from people when I suggest this. But my answer is simple. What do you want to achieve from your interviews? Do you want to find the best developer or the person who can code best under this very specific circumstance? Some people, me being one of them, although since the meds things are much better, can code like machines, but we forget where the spacebar is when we're being assessed. Other, you know, so offer maybe both a take-home coding test and an in-person coding test. Be open-minded to how people approach and solve a coding task. And also don't assume because a colleague tackles a problem in a different or convoluted way that they're incapable of doing the job. If something looks weird to you, ask about it. Maybe it's a better way. And if it isn't, maybe suggest your way. But also get over this. This is quite important to me. They can't remember this boilerplate code, so they must be a rubbish programmer. My strength as a neurodivergent coder is that I can produce great code in a short amount of time after I've done all my prep and mental obstacle jumping. But if you ask me whether I can remember the boilerplate for setting up a task in RX, I will go to the internet and copy paste. Then the U factor. I call it this, it's another elephant. It's something everyone thinks, but nobody says, and it's this. I need to be progressive about mental health, but deep down I am scared about it because I don't understand it. And given the choice between working with someone who has mental illness and someone who doesn't, who would you pick? We are humans, we are naturally afraid of things we don't know. So if you want to fix that, and if you do have that view, you really should, then know the following. Number one, most people with mental illnesses are not about to be committed to Arkham Asylum. They are more likely to hurt themselves than they are to hurt you. Number two, the term somebody without mental illness actually means somebody who hasn't been diagnosed. I had one for years and nobody cared and nobody noticed. Number three, there are benefits to working with people whose brains are wired differently. Although please don't do the Rain Man thing with your autistic friend. Rain Man is a very dreadful representation of autism. And if you take your autistic friend to the casino and lose all your money, you deserve everything you get. Screwing up. I mean, look, okay, we all screw up. We all have our various privileges and different life experiences. So if you mess up, you're not a bad person. Learn from it and move on. This is a complex world and nobody goes through life without doing something accidentally dreadful. Just apologize, learn from it, and that's it. So simple. And final one, challenge toxicity from others, preferably in a respectful way too. Of course, if someone's being malicious, that's for HR. But if it's a microaggression, the benefit of the doubt is important to me. And I like to think that most of my colleagues who say or do something wrong do so because they didn't realize. Just very quickly going to look through some of the questions very quickly. So I'm just going to, yep, 2 seconds. With regards to the question about holistic approaches are wrong, holistic as a definition means that you have a multiple approach to dealing with medicine. What I'm saying is I'm not saying holistic approach is wrong. I'm saying that holistic is often used as a byword, as a proxy word for medicine, alternative medicine. And it's more to address this idea that pills are considered unnatural, they're considered unhelpful, and that you should not be taking them. So, as I've said before, I am the world's biggest atheist, for example. But if prayer or meditation, if that gives you a sense of calm, if that gives you something to concentrate on, and if that helps you during your day dealing with your mental illness, I'm not here to judge you or tell you not to do that. Mental health is a very, very difficult thing, and nobody is telling you what you should or shouldn't do. What I'm trying to say is be aware of the people out there that would exploit you and who are looking to make a quick buck off this. And when it comes to the homeopathy front, no, I'm sorry, it's demonstrably nonsense. There is no study that shows there is any form of benefit beyond the placebo effect, and you can achieve a placebo effect without giving money to lots of very dreadful people. Let's just have a quick look very quickly before I go to my last slide. Yeah, sorry, I've got a lot of comments rather than, that's fine. Yeah, talks about very, very difficult jobs. I had that. I had one job where I told someone, made the mistake of telling the boss that I had depression, and yeah. They're never honest about it, but you suddenly notice the change in how they're viewing you and how they're scrutinizing you and checking you, and it's not easy. Someone just asked me if I could show the survival tip 3. My apologies. Can you see it here now? So this is don't do it because you have to, do it because you can. That's the final one. And I'll go now to my last slide, which is thank you for listening. These are some of my absolute favorite ADHD things. These 2 TikTokers are great. We don't have much in terms of medical research on adult ADHD, so we rely on the community to sort of share our various morbidities and weirdness. So, and also I've been listening to ADHD Big Brother, and he's very, very dad about it, but very, very cool. So I can recommend those podcasts, and there are some things that if it didn't work for me might work for you. So if suggestions I have aren't things that work for you, do have a look at podcasts on Spotify and playlists and listen to other people that sort of have a disorder, because we can help each other. So thank you so much for all your questions, and feel free to tweet me, ask me. And I think we may have some more time for questions, maybe about 4 minutes. My apologies, I've taken up so much time. Does anybody have any more questions they want to ask?
I wanted to, thank you so much for being so vulnerable during this presentation. We appreciate it so much. Slightly overwhelming for me to just hear all this information, but really, really enjoyed it. Julia did ask a question as you're kind of wrapping up in the chat. I've recently been learning about the Agile method, and I found myself laughing because it felt very on par with all of the coping mechanisms I've developed to counter my ADHD. I'm curious if you have any opinions on this as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question, because actually when I first did Agile years ago, it wasn't in the best of circumstances. And it all largely, I find, depends on how the managers consider Agile to be. Agile is supposed to be there to accept that you don't have deadlines, you don't have these sort of restrictions, you base things on the amount of work, you work out the velocity of a team, and you empirically come to to this situation where you can produce reliable estimates. Actually now the way that I do my to-do list is reasonably agile. I sort of go in on if there's something, if I don't get enough done by the end of the day, I'll sort of analyze it and sort of see why not, where I'd sort of estimated things to be wrong, and sort of go from it from there. So I'd love to hear more about your experience. I do wonder if it was like mine, where it was less so much about Agile itself. I think there are, in software methodology, I know a lot of people have got various criticisms about, for example, the clean code methodology and all these various tech bro attempts at sort of making software development a tiny bit more efficient. And it's always from, white men that don't, neurotypical, that don't have any form of understanding of difficulty in the workplace that various others might deal with. So please, honestly, get in touch with me and let me know what that is. I'd love to hear about it. And I'd say this again to anyone who's watched this, particularly any women who have sort of watched it and thought, you know what, there's something that's in this talk that doesn't go to my experience. I want to hear your experience. I want to make sure this talk is as inclusive as possible for future times. So yeah, thank you.
And then we had a couple of questions in the Q&A. So if you're comfortable, could I ask what medication do you use to treat your ADHD, and do you experience any side effects?
Yeah, gladly. So I'm on, it's called, the generic name is lisdexamfetamine. It's in America, it's called Vyvanse. In Germany, we call it Elvanse. No, I don't have any weird side effects. I'm very, very lucky. So I take it when I get up in the morning before I go for my walk. I think I sort of I notice the lull towards the end of the day. I think the only thing I've noticed is I've had a bit of a craving for sugar recently, which besides that, no, I haven't noticed any side effects. The other medication I've taken for years for my depression and anxiety is citalopram, very, very common, which some of you might have. I've been considering maybe changing it or trying to reduce it to see what the difference is with the Elvanse, but I still think the citalopram goes some way, at least to managing some of the anxiety. So I hope that answers your question. But those are the, sorry, Elvanse, I'm on 70 milligrams. I'm on the highest dosage. Someone mentioned, someone mentioned here stimulants haven't worked for me. My first time I did a talk like this was with an author, a German author who wrote a book about her ADHD and her autism. She had the same situation. She said that these just didn't work. The side effects were just too much. So she finds other ways around it. Her book's in German, so if you can't speak German, it's probably not massively useful, but know there are people out there that are like you that cannot take medication, or medication just doesn't work, and they find ways around it. And I found the gamifying of life, that is a very common thing that people try to do, is turning things into habits. It's such a powerful way of trying to hack the way your mind thinks. The gamifying is definitely one, but I'm sorry the stimulants didn't work for you. It's and can I also say, stimulants in general, caffeine was the worst for my trigger for my anxiety. I do not drink any caffeine anymore, but for some reason the literal amphetamine is fine. It's our bodies respond in different ways to different drugs.
Next question. I just completed a coding boot camp and really struggled getting through it because my medication doesn't work for me, and the ADHD struggle was real. Do you know of any resources on how to learn to code with ADHD?
It's an interesting question, and I don't have the answer, and if someone does, then please let me know as well. I'm very much feeling as I go along. I think I'm very lucky in that I have, through the talks I've done, I've spoken to a lot of people who are coders and do have ADHD, and we sort of share ourselves things that we do to sort of cope. In terms of the boot camp stuff, I suppose it depends on your symptoms as well. So whether it was with tiredness, for me, that was a difficulty, is if I start learning something new, I would get exhausted after about an hour. And that only sort of, for me, went away after I took the medication. But maybe it might be something in terms of focus for you. This was an additional problem I had that the medication didn't fix, is I would still get distracted by some things. You know, if I open my computer and there's something I need to do. So I have, my to-do list is very structured. And I know that if I start procrastinating, I'll then click on that and it will come up on the screen, and I won't do anything until that's complete. And break it down into little bits. Can I just give one bit of advice, something I've been doing fairly recently? You don't need to do your to-do list at the beginning of the day. Do it as you go along during the day. If you're debugging, for example, you're trying to find a problem in code, start with create your to-do list item, and you can create sub items as well. Go in, what's your first thing you do? Okay, you need to investigate it. Create that as a to-do list. And as you go along, you're like, you do your investigation and you eliminate various things. You tick them off on the to-do list, you make them as you go along. And the important reason for this is because it keeps you going, but it also makes your mind break things down. And I found that it also stopped me from wandering onto different other topics and start getting frustrated and difficult, because I always had this 1 5-minute task next, which I knew I needed to do. So I can recommend that. But you know what, maybe we should all write a book on ADHD for coding, because I don't think there's anything out there that exists at the moment. But if it does, please let me know.
Any advice for students dealing with mental illness? My professors claim to care for our mental health, but when you need their help or understanding, they often assume you're just using it as an excuse to be lazy and push deadlines.
Goodness me, I wish I'd known I had ADHD at university, because I was a wreck. I can fully appreciate how, if I'd have said I had ADHD at the time, I would not have been treated with any, well, you know, maybe some would have treated with compassion, but others would not. I think obviously different countries have different university systems, but my understanding is in general, there would be some form of students' union or some form of student body or dean that is responsible for the welfare of students. And it's a case of making these known. When I was at university, if there was something that was wrong, what I would do is this following process: speak to the students' union, see if anything can be done in terms of pressure. Then not if the best thing is to make a lot of noise. And that's, for me, I was editor of a student newspaper, so I had the ability to make a lot of noise. But if you have a student newspaper, get in touch with the editor and say, look, I have this problem. This is a disability. And maybe don't say your name, or at least ask them not to publish your name. Try and get some sort of movement going. The one benefit of a university is that it is this microcosm of a big community, and when they get together, they're reasonably unstoppable. So that's what I'd sort of recommend if you're not getting anything out of the traditional routes with professors or lecturers. And once again, I'm very sorry that you have to put up with this. It's just so common.
Really great answers to all of these questions. I use a to-do list for a lot of things, even the tiniest chores. It both works for me and overwhelms me too. Any tips on balancing that?
I'm still not even 100% there myself, to be honest with you. It's a work in progress. I often get into this moment, and it's normally during my ADHD high, where I think I can achieve everything, and I'll add 100 things into my list when I've only ever achieved 100 once. And I know that in the end, I'm going to end up having those roll over to the next day, and that's actually fine. I think what I've done is I've made a use of so Todoist, for example, there is a project structure. Everything is in its separate projects. If you want, for example, to label things, so what I've started to do is label tasks that are fewer than 5 minutes, or less than 5 minutes in terms of duration. And those are great, because when Gradle is building, I can get on with doing one of those things. So maybe label things with time. Maybe don't be too ashamed if your to-do list looks like a mess, if your to-do list looks like your mind, because mine still does. If I showed you my to-do list now, you'd think, oh, he hasn't got it sorted at all. And you know what? I haven't. I've got it reasonably sorted so that I can function reasonably efficiently now. And actually, what's weird, I was chatting to my husband about this the other day. I don't really sit down and relax. I sort of get on with things and get stuff done, because this has become my fixation, which is great in a way. But you know, it's still not perfect in terms of my to-do list strategy. I would say try out as many different methods as you can, label things, look at what you've achieved at the end of the day. So do look at the list, and also try and keep an eye on those projects that remain untouched, because I've got lots of them. One last bit of advice for to-do list thing that just came into my head is when you get one of your, this is common as well, I'm sure you all get it, something in your head that you remember you need to do, and you tell yourself you'll remember, but you always forget, short-term memory loss. What I always do is, no matter what it is I will add a to-do list item that says, make this a to-do list item later. And make your to-do list a to-do list, if that makes any sense, because at least then you'll see it in your list, you won't miss it, and you know that you need to create it. If you've got a big project you need to work on, put it in as one list to say, make the to-dos for this project. And then you can sort of later on go and then, okay, fine, I'll then split that out into various to-dos, or to-dos that I know I need to do now. If it's a project where you won't know what to do until after you've done these things, have a final to-do that says, create more to-dos. So this sounds like very, very cumbersome and very, very difficult, but once you get into the habit, and I realize I'm listening to myself and imagining myself before I was diagnosed and thinking, God, this sounds tedious. So maybe it doesn't work for you, but once you get it into a habit, I've found that this systematic process of using this as your template for life helped me massively.
Next question. Any tips for wanting to break into tech? I feel a little overwhelmed, but also hopeless because I want to start applying to entry-level jobs, but feel like I have so much to learn.
I know someone who's in exactly the same position, and they suffer very much as well from imposter syndrome because they started in an entirely different field, and now in getting into this into tech it seems insurmountable. I'd actually compare coding to learning a language, and I say this as someone who's had to try and learn it in the past 4 years. In that you look at people who are good at it, and they seem like gods. So someone who can speak fluently German and English to me just seems like, you know, something I could never reach. And in reality, any of us who've been coding for a number of years know that people who look at us and think, wow, that's amazing, they can do incredible things. We know, we get surprised when we hear this, because we're like, can we? We still get that imposter syndrome. We are never there. You're never 100% there. I think the advice I would give to you is try to always remember that, like learning a language, it takes practice. There is nothing, in order to pick up a new skill, it takes practice, it takes time. Don't beat yourself up if it's difficult. When it comes to the entry-level jobs, I don't have a massive answer for that. It's so difficult, honestly. If you do not have this degree in computer science, I've seen people really, really struggle to segue from one industry into another. And some people get another master's degree as sort of a bridge. Some people do boot camps. I think what I would advise, and what I would do personally if I were in that situation now, is think of really cool projects you'd like to do. And I don't just mean like, you know, stuff that maybe a RSS aggregator, the stuff we used to do in the early noughties. I mean, think of something you want to fix. Think of something really, really small. I'll give you a good example. I'm currently doing an app that, because I use my German flashcards, and sometimes I want to select text, but use a different translator than the Google Translate one. So I created an app that adds my favorite translators to the context menu when you select text. And I thought, you know what? What's a good idea? I might redo that app and just add it so anybody can add their URL in, and if that URL takes that parameter that's for selected text, they can then add that to the context menu themselves. So think about tasks or things you think would be cool, even just small things. They don't need to be massive, big projects, and just go for it. In terms of learning stuff, it all depends on your type of person you are. If you like reading, I learn, and I recommend this to everyone, w3schools.com. That's where I learned to code. It is that old. I learned to code from W3 Schools when I was 14 years old. I'm now 36. So you know, it's still going, still tried and tested. Have a think about also which language you might want to be interested in. Think about the area. Does UI really interest you? Then, you know, do you like making things pretty? Maybe then you want front end like JavaScript. Does backend really interest you? Then maybe think about things like, you know, API design with Scala, Java. I mean, Java is still going, Kotlin. The reason I quite like mobile, and for a lot of people here, this will be the case, is we like all of those things. We like making things pretty, but we also like the real challenges of getting, you know, something working efficiently on a device where you're not draining the battery, where you're not using too much of the data, where you're having to do all this concurrency as well. So there are lots of different options, but just start. Really just start. Ask for advice and try to remember that everybody had your moment of struggling to type a few lines of code, including me.
How long have you been on meds, and how long did it take for them to start helping?
So Alvanza was since actually it's my Alvanza birthday was yesterday. I've been on it for a year now, and I was surprised actually because it started work. After about an hour, I started feeling this sense of almost tranquil calm, and I was sort of going, huh, I can think about things, and I'm not, my mind isn't going all over the place at however many miles per hour. And I got in touch with a doctor friend of mine, and I said, this is just placebo, isn't it? These, you know, with citalopram, for example, for depression, it's not an immediate thing. It's not like a painkiller. You take it over a period of time, and you know, it's an SSRI, so it takes a long time for your mind to adjust to the drugs. Whereas, but no, Alvanza apparently works pretty quickly. You know, for the first week, I think I did. Sorry, an answer to the question before. I did have one side effect. The anxiety increased a bit. After about 2 weeks, it then started going really far down. So I do apologize. I'm going back in time now and thinking about starting it. I did have that anxiety to begin with as a side effect, but it then went, you know, really way down. So yeah, in terms of, no, I think that's it, isn't it? It was a question about the Alvanza and when it starts taking effect. So pretty quickly. The other two options normally are based on Ritalin and Adderall. Now, my understanding is Ritalin is sort of a very take it when you need it, and Adderall is a take it every day. But for me, this drug works, and I've never needed to try any of the others, so I can't pass judgment on it. And I would sort of stress this one thing. I've just finished reading an excellent book on drugs by the UK's former drug advisor, who does point out how addiction is and various other things and how we respond to drugs are so different because, you know, you may have fewer dopamine receptors, you may have you know, some people are more susceptible to addiction for certain drugs than others. One thing that I found fascinating, I'd love to read more about it medically, is that apparently people with ADHD are less likely to get addicted to stimulants because it just normalizes us. Whereas stimulants to other people, it's not so great. So do remember, we're all different. Some drugs may not work. Some drugs may not work at all. Just keep trying if you can.
I just want to thank everyone for being so engaging in this presentation and asking such great questions. We have 3 questions left in the queue, and then just to be respectful of everyone's time, I think we will wrap up. What was tip number 3 again? I'm trying to take notes and missed it.
Tip number 3 is just say this to yourself when you get that rejection sensitivity. Don't do it because you have to, do it because you can. Because when you take the imperative away and start asking, how many steps does it take to do this? Oh yes, it's 5 minutes taking the bins out. That's when the change of scenery worked for me. It didn't, you know, it doesn't fix it, but it just helped reframe the way that I'm approaching it. And I found that I got a few more things done, particularly during stressful times like the election, when you're constantly in this mood of, I've got so much I could possibly be doing, there is no possible end. So I stop myself and say, and there's a big thing I need to do that I find quite scary. I'll say, okay, you find this scary. Why do you find it scary? What is it you need to do? Can you do it? And if you can, of course you can, because it's actually an easy task. You go, huh, okay, let's not say I need to do this. Let's just say I can do it. And then you find out you just do it.
Have you ever used CBT for dealing with anxiety? I find it like only more work for already overwhelmed? The question is, have you ever tried CBD for dealing with anxiety?
Would you say CBD or CBT?
CBT.
CBT, so yeah, cognitive behavioral therapy. So I no, I haven't. I know people who have. Some found it helpful, some didn't. I was very sort of skeptical that it sort of would help, and I think having had the medication now, maybe some things would help. Maybe CBT would help in some other ways, but certainly getting rid of this big chunk for me, the medicine wouldn't have helped. So the medicine helped, but CBT or therapy wouldn't have. But as I've said before, there are lots of other people who will tell you that CBT has helped them massively. And it's, you know, I wouldn't ever say, you know, don't take therapy, or definitely you must take medicine, because that's not how individuals work. Do whatever you feel most comfortable with. I think what I would recommend is when you go to the psychiatrist for the first time, and you just have in mind the treatment you'd like to try, and sort of say, this is what I've been thinking. I've been reading about this, and I feel that maybe this would work. But CBT, I haven't personally tried.
Really good advice. And then our final question for this session is, did your ADHD medication help with anxiety and depression? My doctor says my anxiety has similar symptoms to ADHD, so I should just focus on treating my anxiety. It's so confusing to navigate between such overlapping conditions. Any thoughts?
Absolutely. It's a massive Venn diagram of a mess. And obviously I was taking citalopram for my depression for a while. These dread spirals I had, that was ADHD. So the thing that was forcing my anxiety into this sort of, as I said before, this depth first dive, where everything would sort of multiply, and this screaming in my head, this intensive screaming in my head, that was ADHD. I know that because that's gone. Or at the very least, when it happens, it's so much less severe now, and I can manage it. One of the great things I realized during the election, whenever I had them, is I was like, I remember this, but I'm not falling on the floor crying. I can analyze it, and I can think, oh, you know what, maybe I know what triggered this. Maybe I can think of ways to sort of make myself feel better. And, you know, so if you think your ADHD is causing your anxiety, I would absolutely push as much as you can to have some form of treatment or diagnosis, because I wish I'd known. So I've been diagnosed with depression, anxiety. I think it was 2013, 2014. 2014 sounds about right. So I've been taking pills since for about 7 years until I was diagnosed with ADHD, and it was the ADHD that was the real problem for anxiety. So if you feel that some of the symptoms feel very much like they are coming from ADHD, I'd really, really recommend being as persistent as you can with your doctor. And if you have the luxury of a choice and you don't have the answer, they don't give you that, try and find another. But once again, I know how difficult it is to find good mental health provision in Berlin. And we're lucky, because I know that in other places, my meds, for example, are illegal. The number of forms I had to get filled and stamped, and appointments with the departments to take my medication back to the UK when I had to go to a funeral, just, you know, so I wasn't arrested on entry for bringing in a Class B drug, is just phenomenal. So yeah, getting back to that question, please do be as much as you can, be persistent and say, I think this is this. I want to have a test for this. I want, maybe if they're able to try the treatment to see if it would work. That's what my psychiatrist did to me, by the way. He was very trial and error and gave the medicine to me, and it just worked, and I was lucky.
And with that, I again just want to thank everyone for joining us, and everyone really for being so vulnerable during this. I know, Chris, you shared your vulnerabilities in journeying very publicly during the presentation, but also so many really vulnerable comments and questions, sharing your own experiences as well for all of our audience members. And so I just want to thank you all for that and being so engaging during this presentation. And with that,
I'd like to say thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I'd like to say thank you as well, and apologies to everyone for not answering everything. So, but thank you so much. Sorry for interrupting.
Oh, no, of course, no. With that, we do welcome all of you to join our Slack channel. to communicate with us. We have a mental health channel where we talk about things like this all the time. You can always find that link on our website, womenwhocode.com/mobile, at one of the icons on the bottom to join. And then we hope to see you all at some of our upcoming events in the next month or so. And with that, thank you for joining and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.